All right, so now we're in the book, the works of Hubert Howie Bancroft. All right, this is volume 5. The Native Races series he has is a lot of volumes. We actually read from his books in part 2 of our Aboriginal series, Indigenous American to African American. All right, go check that out. The Mexicans have a tradition of a journey undertaken at the command of a god and continued for a long time under the direction of certain high priests. High priests led them, right? Who miraculously obtained supplies for their support. Miraculously. You hear this, right? This bears a striking resemblance to the Hebrew story of the wandering in the desert. And who were they with? Moses, right? After the Exodus. All right, another correlation here. This is again from Garcia, another person. There are striking similarities between the Babel, blood, and creation myths of the Hebrews and the Americans. Both Jews and Mexicans were fond of appealing in their adjurations to the heaven and the earth. Both were extremely superstitious and firm believers in prodigies. The character and history of Christ and Huitzilopochtli, again, Huitzilopochtli, remember that, present certain analogies. Right? Christ, they mean Meshach, an anointed one, a Messiah. That's what they mean. They don't mean Jesus. The Mexican temple, like the Jewish, faced the east. As amongst the Jews, the ark was a sort of portable temple in which the deity was supposed to be continually present, and which was accordingly borne on the shoulders of the priest as a sure refuge and defense from their enemies. So amongst the Mexicans and Indians of Michoacan and Honduras, an ark was held in the highest veneration and was considered an object too sacred to be touched by any but the priest. All right, the same religious reverence for the ark is stated by Adair, all right, to have existed among the Cherokee and other Indian tribes inhabiting the banks of the Mississippi, and his testimony is corroborated by the accounts of Spanish authors of the greatest veracity. The nature and use of the ark having been explained, it is needless to observe that its form might have been various, although Scripture declares that the Hebrew ark was of the simplest construction. And again, it would appear from many passages of the Old Testament that the Jews believed in the real presence of God in the ark, as the Roman Catholics believe in the real presence of Christ in the sacrament, from whom it is probable the Mexicans borrowed the notion that he, whom the heaven of heavens cannot contain, and whose glory fills all space, could be confined within the precincts of a narrow ark, and be borne by a set of weak and frail priests. Alright, so they're telling you that a lot of Indian tribes had an ark. They went to war with it. It was sacred to them. It was carried by priests. Alright, every time they stopped with it somewhere, they created a tabernacle or a temporary temple for it, right? Just like the Hebrews, right? Starts to hijack with Jews, right? But again, we're in the book, The Native Races of Volume 5 by Hubert Bancroft, and we're just more different sources, the same thing, right? We also read in the last part with the Seminole, who also had an ark, all right? If the belief of the Mexicans had not been analogous to that of the ancient Jews, the early Spanish missionaries would certainly have expressed their indignation of the absurd credulity of those who believed that their omnipresent God, Huitzilopochtli, was carried in an ark on priests' shoulders. All right? But of the ark of the Mexicans, they say, but little fearing, as it would appear to tread too boldly on the burning ashes of Mount Sinai. It says here, the Yucatec conception of a trinity resembles the Hebrew. It is probable that Quetzalcoatl, whose proper name signifies feathered serpent, was so called after the brazen serpent which Moses lifted up in the wilderness, the feathers perhaps alluding to the rabbinical tradition that the fiery serpents which God sent against the Israelites were of a winged species. Fire serpent, we're talking about dragons, dracons, is that what we're talking about? All right, and see how they linked again Moses with Quetzalcoatl, aka Huitzilopochtli. All right, we got that on the other book. All right. All right, so real quick, just to read the footnote right here, it says representations of the lifting up of serpents frequently occur in Mexican paintings. All right, lifting up of serpents, just like Moses, and the plagues which Moses called down upon the Egyptians by lifting up his rod, which became a serpent, are evidently referred to in the 11th and 12th pages of the Borgian manuscript. All right, you hear that? So they have that in their story, is what he's saying. All right, the Mexicans. An allusion to the passage of the Red Sea. Red Sea, is that the Gulf of California? Seems also to be contained in the 71st page of the Lesser Vatican manuscript. All right, also, all right, a passage of a Red Sea in the Vatican manuscript. In the destruction of Pharaoh and his host and the thanksgiving of Moses may perhaps be signified by the figure on the left in the same page of a man falling into a pit or gulf, and by the hand on the right stretched out to receive an offering. They're talking about the Mexican codices, interpretation of it. All right.
From the book Christopher Columbus and the Participation of the Jews in the Spanish and Portuguese Discoveries by Dr. M. Kaiser Lane. This was written in 1894. And we're in chapter 6 here. It said, among the explorers' companions whose names have come down to us, the complete list is lost. There were several men of Jewish stock. For example, Luis de Torres, again, here we go. Luis de Torres, remember he was the interpreter? It says, a Jew who had occupied a position under the governor of Murcia and who was baptized shortly before Columbus sailed. As he understood Hebrew, Chaldee, and some Arabic, Columbus employed him as interpreter. Again, another source, as interpreter. So they knew they were going to the old world. So he brought this person, Luis de Torres, just in case, because he knew many languages, but especially Hebrew.
Antiquities of Mexico, it says here, comprising facsimiles of ancient Mexican paintings and hieroglyphics by Lord Kingsborough, the drawings on stone by Aglio, in 7 volumes. Again, this is volume 6. All right, so actually we're on page 291, and towards the middle of the page, we're going to start right here. It says, the language of the Mixes or Michex, as the writer affirms, their thick beards, barbas largas, cosa rara en aquellas partes, their scanty population, the hatred which they bore to the other tribes of Indians, and above all, the hatred which the Spaniards bore to them, and the cruel manner in which they hunted and exterminated them, suggest the idea that the Mijes or Michis or Meshis, Meshex, right, Moses, as they are variously called, might have been a colony of Jews, again, a colony of Hebrews, who, like the Hebrews discovered by Montesinos in the neighborhood of Cartagena, all right, Colombia, might have fortified themselves in the mountains, and so have hoped to escape servitude either to the Indians or the Spaniards. It would be surprising if it were fair to presume from the silence of Spanish historians either want of information on their part or of research and curiosity on the part of others, instead of ascribing the reserve to other causes, to find that scarcely any mention is made in their writings of a bearded nation and blacks discovered amongst the Indians, of the bearded nations, right? That existed here, bearded nations, and the blacks, it says here, that's the hijack, copper-colored tribes, so-called Negro, right? Blacks, discovered amongst the Indians. And we're going to go to that footnote, but let's keep reading. It says, although a black skin and a bearded visage afford the surest argument of a mixture of foreign blood with that of the smooth and copper-colored Indian race. From a painting which occurs in the 87th page of the Codex Vaticanus, it would appear that the Capotecas were a bearded people, as well as the Michex or Michex. The two nations bordered on each other, and alliances might sometimes have taken place between them. If the Michex were Jews or Hebrews, right? It is probable that their ancestors constructed the palaces of Mitlan and other splendid monuments in the territory of Capotecas, which Mr. Dupox is not inclined to attribute to the art and industry of the latter people. So we got a little bit of that in the Foreign Quarterly Review, or if you haven't heard it, you will be able to see it in the Foreign Quarterly Review, a presentation I've made. And we talk about what they found in Mexico, this expedition that Mr. Dupox did there in 1805, 1806, and 1807. Pretty much same information that we're going through, old world evidence, hieroglyphic Egyptian, writings, everything, and it's all there, Hebrew, everything. Just like Lord Kingsborough is letting us know that there's a strong correlation and resemblance to the Mesheks being Hebrews. And not only that, right? But then he's also letting us know black. All right? Amongst the Indians, black skin and bearded visage afford the surest argument of mixture of foreign blood, because the way he sees it is that all so-called Negroes came out of Africa, in his view, right? But you were already here. That's why they found blacks, so-called blacks, amongst the Indians. But when you go look at the walls and everything else, all you're going to see is so-called black, right? Copper-colored tribes of America.
So we continue in this book right here called American Indian Myths and Mysteries by Vincent H. Gaddis. We're going to read from chapter 7, Columbus was late. All right, so we're going to dodge the hijack like always. We know America's a true old world. We're just going to use this to correlate some of the information we've gone over many times. Bring it back, like it's the first time. All right, so it says here, instead of being hailed as the first discoverer of the Americas, Christopher Columbus should be credited for renewing interest in it. And I don't think he should be credited for anything. He wasn't lost. He didn't discover anything. There was millions of people over here already. And his name's not even Christopher Columbus. Many scholars now hold that he was well aware of the existence of the New World. All right? He was well aware. Many scholars what? Now hold, right? Now they know he wasn't lost. Like I just told you, Columbus wasn't lost. He was sent over. He knew where he was coming. They were well aware of the existence of the New World over there. As Robert Graves has said, quite likely he had a map. He knew where he was going. The evidence that early Mediterranean sailors reached the Americas has recently grown, thanks to the research of Dr. Cyrus H. Gordon, Brandeis University scholar and expert on ancient Mediterranean culture and languages. All right, we got one of his books we're going to get into as well. He is the author of some 13 books and is especially known in the academic world as an authority on Semitic languages, or Shemitic, right? In 1872, slaves found an inscribed stone on a plantation at Poço Alto near Paraíba, Brazil. The owner copied the text and sent it to the Historical Institute in Rio de Janeiro. In 1966, 94 years later, Dr. Jules Picus, professor of Romance languages at the University of Massachusetts, came across a transcription of the markings. He sent the copy to Dr. Gordon. In comparing the inscription with the latest work on the Phoenician writings, he noticed that the peculiarities of this text found in Brazil and written in a language very closely related to Hebrew and Phoenician referred to events between 534 and 531 BC, okay? They found that in Brazil. It says, in 1885, Smithsonian Institution archaeologists opened an undisturbed burial mound along Bat Creek near London, Tennessee. All right, the Bat Creek Stone. They found 9 human skeletons. Beneath one of the skulls was an inscribed stone. It was called a Cherokee tablet. And in 1894, in a Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology report, it appeared in a photograph printed upside down. They did that on purpose so they wouldn't recognize it. Since then, it has been lying unnoticed in the museum's vault. In 1970, Dr. Joseph Mahan, curator of the Columbus Museum of Arts and Crafts in Columbus, Georgia, noticed the picture during his search in an archaeological literature for inscriptions that might be of Old World origin. He directed Dr. Gordon's attention to it. The Bat Creek Stone, as it is called, is a piece of slate-like ironstone measuring about 4.5 inches long and 2 inches wide. The inscription reads from right to left, as, and those what it says right here, I can't read that, as in the order of our writing, okay? Gordon is not certain of the meaning of the first two Hebraic letters, but thinks the first may be a Said or S and the second a Kof or Q. But the last 5 letters can be translated definitely as for Judah. The L means for, and the WHWD stands for Jehud or Judah, all right? That's from the Bat Creek Stone. It says for Judah. Did they find that again? Where they found that? Neither I nor anyone else, says Gordon, can say it was possibly a forgery. It appears to be the first Mediterranean text found in the New World in its original site with the original objects connected with it. Do you understand what they're letting you know? I've already gone over this before. The Bat Creek Stone was an archaeological find by the Smithsonian Institute. They cannot say somebody forged it. They found it themselves and filed it, took a picture of it backwards, and put it in a box and put it away until somebody saw the picture and turned it around and said, hey, that's ancient Hebrew. It was found, again, in the original site and with the original objects connected with it. The well-carved letters represent Hebrew of the Roman period, roughly 100 AD of the Roman period. Huh? Where is Rome? Where was all that going on? We just found all those trails, right, with all those forts. All roads lead to Rome, right? What Rome? Romani, or the Promised Land. People of the Romani, the pomegranate. Shout out to 432, the drop radio. Con drop with the water.
From the book Anacalypsis, an attempt to draw aside the veil of the Sadic Isis, or an inquiry into the origin of languages, nations, and religions, by the late Godfrey Higgins, Esquire. Volume 2, 1836. In Volume 6, page 79, the Mexican courts are shown to have had exactly the same number of judges as those of the Jews or Hebrews. Again, the Mexican courts are shown to have had exactly the same number of judges as those of the Hebrews, that their sacred numbers were exactly the same, and that both nations kept fast for exactly the same number of days. Lord Kingsborough says the common law of every state in Europe has been confessedly modeled after the Mosaic law. This is very important observation, and I think its truth will not be disputed, but I think there is no other way of accounting for it than to go to the primeval nation. The common law in most states is evidently older than Christianity. We are told that St. Augustine brought Christianity into this island in the year 596. But was there no Christianity in the time of Constantine or before? Lord Kingsborough says, the affinity between the Mexican and the Hebrew laws is greater than between the latter and those of any nation with which we are acquainted. Okay, so I think he's saying that it's more affiliated and has more similarity, the Mexican, right, to Hebrew than to Christian, to the latter. They circumcised with a stone knife, the use of which was expressively ordered. It is remarkable that the circumcision of the Jews should have been performed with a knife made of stone, which is emphatically noticed in the Bible. All right, the Hebrews used a stone knife, the Mexicans used a stone knife for circumcision. Lord Kingsborough has gone to an enormous length in proving that the Mexican rites, ceremonies, etc. were almost precisely the same as those of the Jews, and that they must consequently have been brought by the Jews to Mexico. But one most important observation offers itself on this. We possess what we believe to be the knowledge of all the Jewish rites, history, etc. in Syria, but this is not the way all these things are known by the Americans. All the things said to have taken place in Western Syria, both with Jews and Christians, are said to have been acted in America. There is the same standing still of the sun, the same populi fugia, the same deluge and persons saved in a ship, the same immaculate conception, the same crucifixion and resurrection, but they were all in the American country, not in Syria. All right, again, all the things we just went over, the immaculate conception, the crucifixion, the deluge, right? All the same stories that we hear in the Old Testament, the so-called Bible, happened in the American country, not in Syria.
Just want to go back to this book, Christopher Columbus and the Participation of the Jews in Cuba, Hispaniola, and the other islands which he discovered. Columbus found natives who had their caciques and their own language and traditions. To what race did these aborigines of America belong? Several writers have asserted to have displayed much learning in attempting to prove that the aborigines were descendants of the Jews. So let's continue. It says, this result was reached already in the 16th century by the Spanish clergyman Roldan. His arguments were derived from an unpublished manuscript which he discovered in the library of San Pablo in Seville. Montesinos, who possessed the manuscript of Luis Lopez, the learned bishop of Quito, that's in Ecuador, was convinced that the Peruvians were of Jewish origin. The Peruvians, where do we say the city of David was? I just told you, Cusco, Peru. So again, the Bishop of Quito was convinced that Peruvians were of Jewish origin. The view of Roldan and Gregorio Garcia that the aborigines of America were descendants of the Jews was maintained with many arguments in one and the same year, 1650, independently by the Englishman Thorogood and by the Portuguese Jew Manasseh ben Israel, a renowned rabbi of Amsterdam, who induced Cromwell to allow the Jews to return to England. A Portuguese Marrano, we go again, another Marrano of Villaflor, who, strange to say, also called himself Montesinos and afterwards assumed the name Aaron Levi, informed Manasseh that he had mingled in South America with Jews of the 10 tribes. Manasseh's book attracted much attention and was translated into Latin, Spanish, Dutch, English, Italian, and Hebrew. Right, so it says, nor has interest in it ceased even at the present day. One more interest than the mode of migration is the question whether any analogies in language, in traditions, in religious conceptions, or in religious ceremonies justify the acceptance of this ethnological theory. Roldan's chief argument in support of his view is the language of the Indians in Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica, and the adjoining islands. He contends that it has many resemblances to Hebrew. Again, Roldan's chief argument in support of his view in the language of the Indians in Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica, and the adjoining islands, he contends that it has many resemblances to Hebrew. In fact, he even calls it a corrupted Hebrew. He asserts that such names as Cuba and Haiti are Hebrew, and that they were first applied by the earliest caciques, the chiefs or leaders, Casim. Alright, we're going to see what he means by that, Casim, who discovered and peopled the islands. The names of rivers and persons, islands, the names of rivers and of persons in use among the natives are derived from the Hebrew. For example, Hyena from the Hebrew Ain, stream, Jones from Jonah, Jaque from Jacob, Ures from Urias, Siabao from Siba, Maisi from Moisi. The names of their tools, of their little canoes or kansas, the name Akshi for pepper, the name of the storehouse for maize, grain, and the like, all point to the Hebrew language. Right? Their rites and ceremonies
as well as their language, form one of the main arguments in favor of this theory of descent. Circumcision prevailed among the Indians. They often bathed in rivers and streams. They refrained from touching the dead and from tasting blood. They had definite fast days. Marriage with sister-in-law was permitted if they were childless widows. Wives were discarded for new helpmates. They also sacrificed first fruits on high mountains and under shady trees. They had temples and carried a holy ark before them in time of war. Okay, so they had temples and carried a holy ark before them in time of war. They were also like the 10 tribes, including to idol worship, and according to him, idol worship, what he thought of 10 tribes. All writers and travelers agree, moreover, that there were many Jewish types of faiths among the Indians, the aborigines of America.
All right, so now we're in this book called Aboriginal Monuments of the State of New York, comprising the results of original surveys and explorations with an illustrative appendix by E.G. Squire. All right, again, very famous person. Says here, foreign member of the British Archaeological Association, member of the American Ethnological Society, the Philadelphia Academy of Natural Sciences, the New York Historical Society, the Massachusetts Historical Society, the Historical and Antiquarian Society of Tennessee, etc., etc., all right? By the Smithsonian Institution, 1849, E.G. Squire. All right, he also surveyed the Mississippi mounds, and he also found Hebrew stuff there, and he's going to let you know what he found here in the state of New York, all right, in the Aboriginal monuments. All right, so we're in chapter 6, and it says here, concluding observations. By whom were the Aboriginal monuments of Western New York erected, and to what era may they be ascribed? The consideration of these questions has given rise to a vast amount of speculation, generally not of the most philosophical, nor yet of the most profitable kind. If the results arrived at have been erroneous, unsatisfactory, or extravagant, it may be ascribed to the circumstance that the facts heretofore collected have been too few in number and too poorly authenticated to admit of correct conclusions, not less than to the influence of preconceived notions, and to that constant leaning towards the marvelous, which is a radical defect of many minds. Rigid criticism is especially indispensable in archaeological investigations, yet there is no department of human research in which so wide a range has been given to conjecture. All right, so you see a lot of this stuff is just guessing, hypothesis they have. He's letting you know, conjecture. Men seem to have indulged the belief that here nothing is fixed, nothing certain, and have turned aside into this field as one where the several rules which elsewhere regulate philosophical research are not enforced, and where every species of extravagance may be indulged in with impunity. I might adduce numberless illustrations of this remark. The Indian who wrought the rude outlines upon the rock at Dighton little dreamed that his work would ultimately come to be regarded as affording indisputable evidence of Hebrew, Phoenician, and Scandinavian adventure and colonization in America again. Whoa, the Indian, he never thought, right? That's what he's saying. He never dreamed that his work would ultimately come to be regarded as affording indubitable evidence of Hebrew, Phoenician, and Scandinavian adventures and colonization in America, and the builders of the rude defenses of Western New York as little suspected that Celt and Tartar, and even the apocryphal Madoc with his 10 ships would in this, the 19th century of our faith, be vigorously invoked to yield paternity to their labors. All right, so he's letting you know that this is the true old world. They're finding all these similarities in these mounds, right? Again, this is from the Smithsonian Institute. He's letting you know indisputable evidence.
So we continue in this book right here called American Indian Myths and Mysteries by Vincent H. Gaddis. It says here, another ingredient in the amaranth racial melting pot was discovered in 1966. Manfred Metcalf, An amateur archaeologist was collecting rocks at the U.S. military reservation at Fort Benning, Georgia. All right, you guys never heard of this? This is the Metcalf Stone. All right, this was found again where? Fort Benning, Georgia, in order to construct an outdoor fireplace for his patio. In a rubbish pile at the side of an old grist mill, he found a red sandstone slab with symbols cut into it. He took the stone to Dr. Joseph B. Mahan at the Columbus Museum of Arts and Crafts, the same man who was to call Dr. Gordon's attention to the Bat Creek stone later. Mahan is an expert on marine ethnology and archaeology. He is a specialist on the Yuchis, a tribe that once inhabited what is now Georgia. All right, listen to this, Yuchis. All right, I got some images of the Yuchis here drawn of them. As you can see, copper-colored tribes of America, right? And they were resettled to Oklahoma in 1836. 1836. That might be lost heritage right there. He believes that Yuchis may have originally come from the old world, and he thought the stone's inscription might add evidence to his theory. It is their agricultural festival. That is so amazing, for it is described in detail in the Bible. What? Hold up. Hold up. Their agricultural festival, right? Like we were talking about in past videos about giving thanks, the Feast of Harvest, that they actually mentioned also in the Old Testament. This is what they're saying here. It is their agricultural festival. That is so amazing, for it is described in detail in the Bible. In the 23rd chapter of Leviticus, Mahan points out that there are far too many resemblances for this to be accident or sheer coincidence. This is the Feast of Booths, Tabernacles of Sukkot, all right? Listen, there are too many resemblances for this to be accident or sheer coincidence. Who's the real? Where's the true old world? You are the book. That's what I've been trying to show you. This is the Feast of Booths, Tabernacles of Sukkot, which includes 1, an 8-day festival that starts on the 15th day or full moon of the Holy Harvest month, living in booths throughout the festival. 4, at the religious center for the tribe, and 5, maintaining a sacred fire. The first 3 of these same observances are carried on by some Jews to this very day. By some, not all, but they're still doing it here. They are the source. The Jews make a pilgrimage to their religious center on the 15th day of their harvest month. During the 8th day festival, they live in booths that have open spaces in the roofs and are covered with foliage and tree branches. There's a sacred area in which a fire is kept burning, and they celebrate by walking around the fire in a circle. 2 large decorated branches are carried by 2 men during the circling walk, and other men during other parts of the observance shake similar branches. During identical time periods, Jews today who celebrate this festival dwell in booths open to the sky, but covered with fruits, vegetables, and foliage. They take circular walks or circumambulations, and plants tied together into a staff are used for ceremonial shaking. Although the Jewish celebration of tabernacles no longer has the sacred fire, it is referred to in Leviticus 23:37, and the Yuchi were still doing it when the Sephardi Moorish people got here. They were still practicing it correctly. They were still doing it, okay?
And in the book Discourse on Evidences of the American Indians being the Descendants of the Lost Tribes of Israel by M.M. Noah, 1837. The Indians, like the Hebrews, speak in parables. Of their dialects, there is no doubt that the Algonquin and Huron are the parents of 500 Indian tongues. They are copious, rich, regular, forcible, and comprehensive, and although here and there strong Hebrew analogies may be found, yet it is reason to suppose that the Indian languages are a compound of all those tongues belonging to the various Asiatic nations through which they passed during their pilgrimage. Before we continue, I just wanted to emphasize what he said about the languages having, so many similarities to the Hebrew, and how Algonquin is one of the parent languages So I wanted to show you this. So I wanted to show you, for example, in this book I found here, it's called Antiquities, the first book of the New English history. So they're talking about New England up there in, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, all that area up there, right? New England. All right, so just wanted to go to this page real quick. So this part of the book, they're talking about a place called Nahum Keek, or Nahum Keek, all right, of which place I have somewhere met with an odd observation that the name of it was rather Hebrew than Indian, for Nahum signifies comfort and Keek signifies haven. In our English, not only found it an haven of comfort, but happened also to put an Hebrew name upon it, for they called it Salem, for the peace which they had and hoped in it, and so it is called unto this day. So you see, Salem actually was an original Hebrew vibration, which sounded like Nahum Keek, which meant comfort, haven, comfort, a haven of comfort, a Salem, a place of peace. All right, and remember, this area is Algonquin languages. All right, so I have another example here. This is in another book. It's called A Key into the Languages of America, or a help to the language of the natives in that part of America called New England, right? So Algonquin, together with brief observations of the customs, manners, and worships of the natives. All right, so in this area, right? So this is written in 1643. The other one was actually from 1709, I believe. I have to tell you. All right, it's a little blurry here, but I just want you to see. So it says, first, others, and myself. So he goes through a lot of points. So right away in this book, his first point of what he wants to say about these Indians he's encountering, these Algonquin-speaking Indians, right? Says, the first, others, and I and myself have conceived some of their words to hold affinities with the Hebrew. Secondly, they constantly anoint their heads as the Jews did. All right. Thirdly, they give dowries for their wives as the Jews did. All right. So this is just another example. And this is from an original writing in 1643. All right. From the book Anacalypsis, an attempt to draw aside the veil of the Sadic Isis, or an inquiry into the origin of languages, nations, and religions, by the late Godfrey Higgins, Esquire, Volume 2, 1836. And we're going to go all the way to Chapter 4. The Mexican history gives us a long account of their arrival in Mexico, from a distant country far to the west. The stations where the colony rested from time to time during its long migration, which took many years, are particularly described, and it is said that the ruins of the towns which they occupied are to be seen in several places along the coast. I think it is evident that this migration from the west is merely a mythos. The circumstances are such to render it totally incredible. In principle, it is the same as that of the Jews, but accommodated to the circumstances of the New World. Again, the migration stories of the Mexicans, right? He's saying the Mexica, the Mesheks, Mexica, Moses, Meshi. In principle, it is the same as that of the Jews, but accommodated to the circumstances of the New World. It really seems impossible to read Lord Kingsborough's notes on page 241 and not to see that the mythos of a chosen people and a God conducting them after long migrations to a promised land, attributed by the Spanish monks to the contrivance of the devil, was common to Jews, Christians, and Mexicans. I think it seems clear from page 186 that Mexico, or Meshi, Mexico, Meshi, Moses, Moshe, was the Hebrew Meshi. Again, this person is saying what we've been saying already. Mexico was the Hebrew Meshi. Then it would be the country of the Messiah. Mexico, the country of the Messiah, the Meshech, Mexico. or it might equally be the country of the leader whom we call Moses, of the people whom we have found in western Syria. Again, Mexico, named after the country of the leader whom we call Moses. All right, again, this is from a different source. We're getting this, but we've been correlating already. His lordship shows that the word Mesitli or Mexico is precisely the same as the Hebrew word Messi or Mesih or anointed, and that one of these gods shall sit on the right hand of the other. Page 82. In the next page, he says the full accomplishment of the prophecy of a Savior in the person of Quetzalcoatl. Again, the accomplishment of the prophecy of a Savior in the person of Quetzalcoatl, Jehoshua, has been acknowledged by the Jews in America. He says, page 100, the temptation of Quetzalcoatl, the fast of 40 days ordained by the Mexican ritual, the cup with which he was presented to drink, the reed which was his sign, the morning star which he is designated, the tepalt or stone which was laid on his altar and called Teotecpalt or divine stone, which was likewise an object of adoration. All these circumstances, connected with many other relating to Quetzalcoatl, which are here omitted, are very curious and mysterious. But why are they omitted by his lordship? The pious monks accounted for all these things by the agency of the devil and burned all the hieroglyphic books containing them.
So this is the book Manasseh ben Israel and His World. It says the rise and fall of the Jewish Indian theory. Okay, so according to the Puritans, because they were living there, it says besides the settler missionaries found matters in Massachusetts Bay Colony quite different than Meade had described. They found docile, friendly Indians, some of whom wanted to become Christians, according to them, right? I don't know if they would really want to become Christians. They established schools for them, and they tried to get the great John Comenius to use Harvard as the center of universal enlightenment for Indians and Europeans. They translated the scriptures for the Indians. It says, and it continues, so pay attention to this part. The missionaries began to suspect something radically different was going on in the environs of Boston, namely that pure English Christians were baptizing and converting Indians who were Jews. Wow. All right. What were they doing? They were baptizing and converting Indians who were Jews. So that's what the Puritans were realizing. And if the Indians were Jews, an enormous missionary effort would be needed. So on behalf of the New England Missionary Society, a volume was written by the Norfolk preacher one Thomas Thorogood called Jews in America, or the probability that the Indians are Jews. This was dedicated to Charles I. And it says, continuing with Bodinant, while Bodinant and Crawford and other millenarians, people who believed that the end of the world was coming during that time, saw the Indians as the lost tribes, new evidence emerged. The two new theories were offered, and one that of the leading Jewish spokesman Mordecai Noah, the other by the founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith. The new evidence were some artifacts that were discovered. One, phylacteries that were found in an Indian burial mound in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Another, a Hebrew inscription outside New Milford, Connecticut. The third, a Hebrew tomb in Ohio, added to the alleged resemblances that the Lord Kingsborough thought he had found in the Aztec codices to ancient Hebrew motifs. Lord Kingsborough published 9-folio volumes of the codices, magnificently illustrated with copious notes from Manasseh, Adair, and others, to prove the Indians, especially those of Central America, were Jews. Although he bankrupted himself in the process of publishing the material, he convinced only the already convinced and became a laughingstock to others. The Hebrew inscription in New Milford was examined by America's greatest Christian Hebraist, Ezra Stiles, president of Yale University again, who guessed it was somebody's name. No one in the area could be found who was Jewish or who knew Hebrew. So a suggestive mystery remained. The phylacteries
were a more exciting find. When it was realized that these are used by a Jew in his morning prayers, the physical object was found around 1820 halfway down a pile of Indian bones in a burial mound. Because of the Hebrew letters contained in the object, Christian scholars from Harvard were consulted who identified the object for what it was. But how did it get to where it was found? An intensive investigation was carried out to find out if any Jewish traders had been in Pittsfield, if any captured British soldiers had held there were Jewish, with negative results. The great Jewish convert, the Reverend Joseph Frey, who gave 30,000 sermons in America, said he had never spoken in Pittsfield, and the phylacteries were not his. Says the literature of the period indicates that this discovery was taken very seriously as pointing to the possibility that the Indians were Jewish. No other explanation could be found for the phylacteries being where they were found. The item was deposited with the Massachusetts Historical Society for further study. By now, when some of us would like to see what was discovered, however, the item has been lost. Here we go again. The item was lost. Like everything else that doesn't fit into history.
From the book Israelite and Indian, a parallel in planes of culture. Address of Garrick Mallory, Vice President, Section H of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Toronto meeting, August 1889. All right, this is an address from Garrick Mallory, Vice President of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Gary says, many authors have contended that the North American Indians were descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Prominent among them was James Adair, whose work highly useful with regard to the customs of the southeastern Indians, among whom he spent many years, was mainly devoted to proof of the proposition. The Reverend Ethan Smith is also conspicuous, and even the last book discussing the Indians published last year, bearing the comprehensive title The American Indian, favors the same theory. The authors of the school mentioned have for their excuse the fact, which I freely admit with greater emphasis, that an outstanding number of customs of the North American Indians are the same as those recorded of the ancient Hebrews. But the lesson to be derived from the parallel between the Indians and the Israelites is very different from that of a descent advocated. The history and records of the Israelites must be chiefly considered regarding the times before they had formed a nationality and had become sedentary. Nearly contemporaneous with the nationality was the general use of writing, and it would appear that the error in never having acquired a written language, their stage at the Columbian discovery, allowing for the differences among themselves, shows a degree of development similar to that of the Israelite patriarchal period and the early Canaanite occupation before the rule of kings. Right? The argument strongly urged derived from an alleged similarity between the Hebrew and some Indian languages, especially in identity of some vocables, is not to be considered. Perhaps the most absurd of all the coincidences insisted upon by Adair was the religious use of sounds represented by him to be the same as the word Jehovah, or as we know, Jehovah or Hawa, as the deported Israelites did not pronounce the name given in English version as Jehovah, and we know that V was a W back in Paleo Hebrew, so it's Jehovah mostly, and the Y and J, wasn't really there, so we're talking about Jehovah, Hawa. And the mode of its spelling and pronunciation is at this moment in dispute, like I just said. The mode of its spelling and pronunciation at this moment is in dispute until today is still in dispute. Hawa. Generally given as Have, it would be very remarkable if the tribes of Indians, supposed to be descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, should at this time know how to pronounce a name which their alleged ancestors did not possess, or at least did not use.
We continue in this book right here, called American Indian Myths and Mysteries by Vincent H. Gaddis. It says clay and stone figurines found near Miguel de Allende, Mexico, display Mediterranean influence. Some look like mermaids, legendary beings derived from the Phoenician god Dagon. Dagon, all right, Dagon in Hebrews, corn nutrition, fertility, god. Where are they really coming from? All right, they just found that here in Mexico. So where were they really coming from? While other feature strange musical instruments, chairs, and beasts of burden pulling chariot-like vehicles, all unknown to Americans before the Spaniards came. There are a number of rock inscriptions in eastern South America, particularly in Brazil and the Amazon basin, believed to be Phoenician, but it appears they came to North America too. According to Charles M. Boland, in his book They All Discovered America, Phoenician relics have been found in Pennsylvania and New Hampshire. If Professor Barry Fell, a Harvard University linguist, has read stone inscriptions correctly, a Phoenician seafarer king named Hanno came to New England almost 2,500 years ago. Fell and James Whitall, chief archaeologist for the Early Sites Research Society of Danielson, Connecticut, made a study of the stone in the spring of 1975. The stone measuring 45 inches by 5 inches by 15 inches was found by New England settlers in 1658, and until recently had been used as doorstop at an American mission. Fell's translation of the two-line inscription, proclamation of annexation, do not deface. Hanno of this takes possession. He believes the last sentence means Hanno takes possession of this place. To explain the inscription, on a certain basalt rock in New Mexico, you are asked to believe that a Mormon wandering far south of the Mormon Trail to Utah came to a remote desert area. Here, he laboriously chiseled the Ten Commandments in a combination of Phoenician, Hebrew, and Greek on the tipped underside of a large boulder while lying on his back. All right, so this is the story they want us to believe. This talking about, we're going to see Los Lunas Stone. We've gone over Los Lunas Stone. I'm going to go over it again a little bit since they're talking about it in this book. Here, he laboriously chiseled the all right, so they're saying, because you're going to see at the angle that it's on, that's why they're making fun of it right now. Talking about he had to have done this all on his back, a Mormon, right? Or perhaps a desert drifter who was an expert on ancient languages, because whoever wrote it knew about the ancient languages. It says, this desert wanderer or drifter cut the hieroglyphics as a hoax that he never thought would worth disclosing. This, in effect, was a suggestion of Smithsonian Institution scientists when they were confronted with this enigma. The rock lies in one of the most desolate regions of the state, a bluff along the now dry Rio Puerco River. The nearest town is Los Lunas. The characters are worn and are obviously very old, cut into the hard basalt centuries before the Mormons came west. Also obvious is the fact that the inscription was made when the rock face was perpendicular to the mesa. But years later, the soil supporting it on the bluff had eroded, causing it to topple. The translation originally was made by Dr. Robert Pfeiffer of Harvard University. Okay, the translation was made by who? A Harvard University scholar. A startling feature is that the hieroglyphics are similar to those inscribed on the sarcophagus of the king of Sidon, which dates from about 572 BC. Even to the same combination of the three languages, it's exactly the same as the one they're dating to 572 from King Sidon's sarcophagus. Exact same writing with the three languages combined like that. Exactly the same. If Phoenician seamen had sailed around Florida and into the Gulf of Mexico, then up the Rio Grande River and the Rio Puerco, the rock's location would have been where the voyage ended, as from this point on, up the river would not have been navigable. Are you see what they're saying? So they're always trying to say it was all Phoenician because it always has to be so-called Phoenician because that's their only knowledge of anybody seafaring during these times, supposedly from the old world. But the Phoenicians, again, are from here. And they learned that language they brought to the rest of the world from here. So it wasn't just Phoenicians, though, who knew these languages.
Welcome to World Events in the Bible. I'm Brandon T. Ward. We're outside Los Lunas, New Mexico at Hidden Mountain. And we're looking at the mystery stone here, the Decalogue, which is the 10 Commandments. Some of the locals call this 10 Commandment rock. And the whole idea behind this stone here is, first, it's in Paleo Hebrew, and it's basically like a version of the 10 Commandments. It's estimated to be between 2,000 to 3,000 years. Some people say that that's not true. Obviously, if this was true and written by Hebrews, it came to North America in ancient history, it would rewrite our history. So it's obviously not commonly accepted. But there is a lot of it's very interesting. You know, it's very interesting. Paleo Hebrew writing, the last it was really used was in 600 BC. So we're talking about, 2,500 years ago, roughly, in that time frame, to be general. And that's what this is. It is 80 tons, this stone here is 80 tons, and you can tell it's actually tipped over. Obviously, the writing is at a 45-degree angle we got here, and I'll show you some other pictures in here and maybe some video clips where you can actually see a bigger version of the entire boulder structure. And you can see over time it did tip over. So when did that happen is kind of the question. The area is a little bit of a volcanic type of area. There's a lot of like burning on the rocks on top. Let's see here. I just have some notes I just kind of want to go over, just kind of a brief video for you. This has been known since the 1850s by the Indians, apparently, according to the locals. In 1880, a gentleman was brought here by an Indian guide he had, and that's when he was shown it and started to see it. And you got to remember, back in those days, Paleo Hebrew, barely anybody even knew it. There was no really scholars of it. If you read any historical records of how we got the Bible and everything like that, you'll kind of understand that in the 1800s, they were having a really hard time trying to decipher some of the records of ancient writings like these. In the 1950s, it was the Boy Scouts came up here and actually kind of bleached or blanched the stone and wire brushed it, and that's why it's so clean today. If you can make out in the video up on top here, it's a little black, kind of what I was getting at earlier. There's a lot of patina on the rock. You got some moss going on here. So that's all been stripped from the face of the rock. And if you can see down just the edge over here, you got some of the patina back again. So it's all been stripped off. So the point is there's no way to date it, to actually get a real date. It's just kind of estimates that people have. There's spelling mistakes in here. And why that I find is so interesting is one scholar, when he was asked about it, said, hey, would this prove that it's a hoax? The stone is fake? Or would it prove that this writing is real? And he said, actually, it would prove that the writing was kind of real, because a forger, they go out of their way to make it look so legitimate, like to make the writing, the text look so good, the spelling to be correct. And that's not what we have here. So that kind of rules out a forger, at least on one degree. The stone writing, like I said, is about 2,000 to 3,000 years old, according to some people. And I found that really interesting because the time of Solomon was roughly 900 BC, so 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. But where did those riches come from? Did they come from the Mideast? Did they come from there? Or did they come from the United States, where we know this country has been immensely blessed by God? The natural resources of this country, is it possible that they came here? Another geologist had pointed out that actually an ancient river existed just over the way, and that would have came off of the Rio Grande. So they would have been able to actually come up through the Gulf of Mexico and come up into this part here and see, travel up by ship basically and get here much easier than it is today. It's just pretty much desert all as you look around, some mountains blended in. But I found it interesting. Is it true? Did ancient Hebrews come here and write the inscription on the stone?
The Olmecs were the most enigmatic of all pre-conquest Amerins. In Mexico, at ancient archaeological sites, mostly Olmec, have been found figurines or carved relics of bearded men with Semitic features, okay? Now, I just want to point this out, and I'm glad they mentioned this. We tend to only know about the stone heads, the large stone heads, and like certain phenotypes, but in their pottery, in their stone artifacts, other than the stone heads, you find all kinds of different features. So they find then relics of bearded men with Semitic features. In one instance, wearing shoes with pointed upturned toes, similar to shoes worn by the Phoenicians and Hittites. Other discoveries are urn figurines, apparently depicting the Egyptian bird-headed god Ra, and a sphinx, small-wheeled chariots similar to those found in Phoenician tombs. Relics of Negroid dancers in Assyrian style. All right, listen to all this. This is what the Olmec culture, okay? Look at everything they're finding here with the Olmec culture, right? These people did not call themselves the Olmec. And huge basalt heads with Negroid features, and that's the ones we know with the stone heads, right? Some of these massive heads weigh over 10 tons. During his third voyage, Columbus recorded that when he reached Haiti, the inhabitants told him that black men from the south and southeast had preceded him to the island. All right, so-called black men, right? Black men from the south, from South America, right? And in 1513, Vasco Núñez de Balboa reported finding a colony of Negroes living at a place called Cuareque on the Caribbean coast of Colombia. All right, this is stuff we gone over in my series from Indigenous American to African American, and trying to understand all this stuff. These are primary sources that actually did quote all this stuff. The Negroid sculptures and reliefs, however, indicate that black people came to America as free men. They didn't come. A lot of them were already here since ancient times, since the beginning of time. Okay? But he's saying they came as free men, not as slaves. If anything, if any of them came from foreign parts in ancient times, which I do believe they did. A lot of the other black folks from other parts of the world were trading back and forth with the local people over here.
This is from the book The Secret Archives of the Vatican by Maria Luisa Ambrosini. And so it says here, greater than Europe and Africa. The popes had been collecting Hebrew codices since Avignon times. And while the count of a voyage a quarter of the way around the world is an odd thing to find in the records of a desert people, there is. So they're saying that the Vatican and these popes had documents and codices going back, Hebrew codices, stating that how they traveled the world, right? How they had lands far away. The fact that Columbus took with him on his first voyage an interpreter, again, who was converted Jew and skilled in Hebrew, though he knew only a little Arabic, suggests that he may have attached importance to the legend. All right, so even the Vatican and these people studying these records in the Vatican let you know that Columbus brought this Hebrew interpreter for a reason. He believed in something. All right, just like he wrote that he was going to go recover the holy city and Mount Zion, right? A fragment of supporting evidence comes from paleobotany. The same variety of cotton was being cultivated both in Peru and in the Indus Valley in 2500 BC. All right, so here we go again. Peru, right? Peru. So they're saying that we had cotton, right? We were making cotton, growing it, making clothing, right? In Peru, in the same time as the Indus Valley. This is the true old world. We've seen before that the oldest pyramids are over here, the mummies, this is Atlantis. So we can see that, they're always trying to match something old that happened over here to something in the other side of the world. All right, but we know this is the true old world, right? So let's continue. It says, since cottonseed is killed by seawater, this may be an indication of intercontinental contact somewhere back in the megalithic age that seems less and less primitive the more we learn about it. The great names of the past crowded around the discovery of America, as ancient writings newly printed were searched for evidence and opinion. Columbus studied Ptolemy, Aristotle, and Pliny. So you see Columbus studying these people because these people are the ones with the legends, right, of Atlantis, like Plato and all these other people. So these same people studied the Plato. He had a copy of Pope Aeneas Silvius' Historia Rerum Ubique Gestarum. The Pope had modestly planned a universal history and geography and had completed the section on Asia. He read Esdras, the prophet of the Apocrypha, and was inclined to believe him because St. Ambrose and St. Augustine had thought highly of him. Also, Esdras told Columbus what he wanted to hear. His estimate of the Earth's relative proportion of land and water made it seem that the Atlantic would be conveniently narrow. So you see how they're talking about Esdras, right? And we also know that in the book of Esdras is when they talk about the Assyrian captivity and how the lost tribes, right, decided to flee into the wilderness, right? They separated, right? So continuing, even Prince Henry the Navigator in his research Institute of Sagres found some of his inspiration and motivation in legend. All right, So all these legends they had in Europe and West Africa is really stories of old, of Atlantis or slash America, or the old India, or the third Ethiopia, right? The route around Africa was to lead not only to the prosperity of Oriental trade, but to the kingdom of Prester John. Again, Prester John, aka King David, aka the Grand Khan or Wan Khan, into the gardens of the high point of the world.
All right, so I'm in this book now. It's called Publications of the American Jewish Historical Society, number 11. And we're going to go to page 75 of this book. And it says here, The Jews of New England, other than Rhode Island, prior to 1800, by Leon Hunter, A.M. It says, the Puritan Revolution in New England had awakened a keen interest in the Jewish race, and this interest was powerfully reflected in early New England history. It is in Massachusetts that this tendency was most strongly exhibited. In Massachusetts. Hebrew was carefully taught at Harvard College, and the restoration of the Jews was one of the most popular topics. The restoration of the Jews, all right? In 1649, Eliot, the missionary, announced that the Indians were of Hebrew origin. Whoa, what? Yep. John Eliot, right? He also translated one of the first Bibles into the Algonquin language. Actually, the first Bible in the U.S. was in Algonquin. It was done here supposedly by John Eliot. And it says here that in 1649, he announced that the Indians were of Hebrew origin. All right. Number 2, it says here the footnote. And it says it's Felt's Ecclesiastical History. All right. So this is the book, The Ecclesiastical History of New England, comprising not only religious but also moral and other relations, by Joseph B. Felt. All right, this is volume 2, 1862. All right, on page 12 of this book, it says here, July 8th, Eliot communicates his purpose to Whitfield for translating the Bible into Indian tongue and educating some Indian youths. All right, so remember I told you he wrote the first Bible in the Americas. It was actually in Algonquin, complete Bible done in the Algonquin language by John Eliot. All right, and it says here that he was translating the Bible to educate some of the Indian youths, and mentions the need of help from the charitable. He previously communicated his opinion that the Indians here were of Hebrew origin. All right, so it's in here. We verified the source, right? Ecclesiastical History of New England. John Eliot letting you know, right, that the Indians here were of Hebrew origin. All right, why is he saying that? All right, so back in the other book, all right, the American Jewish Society book that we were just reading, so we were able to verify the source, right? It says in footnotes 2, so again, John Eliot in 1649 announced that the Indians were of Hebrew origin. In the following year, Downham issued an appeal to Englishmen for contributions to Indian missions on the plea that those of New England were of Jewish descent. All right, they were of what? Hebrew descent. All right, that's 3. Again, that's page 17 in the same one, Felt's Ecclesiastical History. When in 1650, Thorogood publishes Jews in America, we've read from that, Eliot of Massachusetts at once proclaimed that the 37th chapter of Ezekiel principally applied to the Indians as such use. All right, so John Eliot's letting you know that the 37th chapter of Ezekiel principally applied to the Indians. All right, and stated that the New England churches were the preface to the New Havens. All right, you see what's going on in Massachusetts in the 1600s. Go back in the book, Ecclesiastical History of New England. All right, in page 17, just want to go ahead and verify that. In his appeal for the cause of missions here, the Reverend John Downham addresses his countrymen in England. Come forth, ye masters of money, part with your gold to promote the gospel. Let the gift of God in temporal things make way for the Indians' receipts of spirituals. He also takes the ground that the Indians of New England are of Jewish descent. All right. And we're still in the book, page 22, Ecclesiastical History of New England. It says, this year Mr. Thorogood publishes a treatise. This is page 22. This year Mr. Thorogood publishes a treatise in England entitled Jews in America, or probabilities that the Americans are of that race. Sewell states that Eliot, the missionary, believed that the 37th chapter of Ezekiel was principally applicable to the Indians, as such Jews, and many other parts of Scripture apply to the Indians. All right, back in the book, American Jewish Historical Society, number 11, page 76, says, when in 1650, great mortality occurred among the colonists, it was supposed to be the preparation for the calling of the Jews. This subject engrossed the leading mind, and Roger Williams, sending a pamphlet on the subject to Winthrop in 1654, says, I pray you read this, Jew. By 1665, the view was generally held, in Massachusetts at least, that the outcasts of Israel were about to be gathered together. And the great number of works published on that topic at that period in Massachusetts alone is simply amazing. This was what they were talking about. Why were they talking about this only during that period in Massachusetts? What else is going on in the 1600s? Aren't they sending Pequots and enslaving the Indians as well? Sending the Pequots away? A lot of the native tribes up there in New England, in Massachusetts, weren't they doing that also? All right, but they're also talking about what the Indians were and who they were. And it was a big topic. It was simply amazing how much information, how popular this topic was at that time. And we're in this other book, which is called An Authentic History of Lancaster County in the State of Pennsylvania by J.I. Mombert, D.D., member of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. This is written in 1869. All right, so I just want to show you that this is recorded here as well, that he said that the natives, again, were of complexion black, but by design like the gypsies, and their skin must need be swarthy. All right, just wanted to show you. And again, their language is lofty yet narrow, but like the Hebrew. So you can see this is actually recorded, authentic history. All right, but I want to show you one more thing. So we're on page 68 of the same book, Authentic History of Lancaster County in the state of Pennsylvania. And again, they're reading off William Penn's letters and notes. And he says here, it says note number 26, it says, for their original, I am ready to believe them of the Jewish race, or Hebrew, right? Hebrew, those from the other side, the feathers, Eber. All right, I mean of the stock of the 10 tribes. And he don't just mean any kind of Jewish, right? Sephardic, Ashkenazi, Canaanite, Moabite, Ishmaelite, he don't mean all the Jewish race. He just means the stock of the 10 tribes, the lost 10 tribes, Israelites. But this is not all. They agree in rites. So they're rites as well. They reckon by moons. They offer their first fruits, right? They have a kind of Feast of Tabernacles. And the Feast of Tabernacles, all right, that's the real Thanksgiving, the Feast of Tabernacles. They are said to lay their altar upon 12 stones. They're mourning a year, customs of women, with many other things that do not now occur. All right, so William Penn is letting you know he knows they are of the Israelite or of the 10 lost tribe stock. All right.
Since delivering the present lecture, I have received a letter from Mr. Catlin, the celebrated painter, and we know who that is, right? From aboriginal to American to African American videos. He was one of the actually wrote about the copper-colored natives, their hair styles. He painted them the way he painted them. The copper complexion, so-called Negro complexion, and some of the a lot of the paintings actually. So they're referring to him here. It says the celebrated painter, who for the last 5 years has been residing among the Indians. Mr. Catlin says, the first thing that strikes the traveler in an Indian country as evidence of their being of Jewish origin, and it is certainly a very forcible one, is the striking resemblance which they generally bear in counter and expression of head to those people. In their modes and customs, there are many striking resemblances, and perhaps as proof they go much further than mere personal resemblance. Amongst those customs, I shall mention several that have attracted my attention, though probably they have never before been used for the same purpose, and others I may name, which are familiar to you, and which it may not be amiss to mention, as I have seen them practiced while in their country. The universal custom among them of burying their dead with feet to the east, I could conceive, have no other meaning or object than a journey to the east after death. Like the Jews who expected to travel underground after death to the land of Canaan. On inquiry, I found that though they were all going towards the setting sun during their lifetimes, they expected to travel to the east after death. Amongst the tribes, the women are not allowed to enter the medicine lodge. They were not allowed in Judea to enter the court of Israel. Like the Jewish customs also, they are not allowed to mingle in worship with the men, and at meals are always separated. In their modes, fastings, feastings, or sacrifices, they have also a most striking resemblance. Amongst all the Western tribes who have not been persuaded from those forms by white men, they are still found scrupulously and religiously adherent to and practicing them to the letter. The very many times and modes of sacrificing remind us forcibly of the customs of the Israelites, and the one in particular, which has been seen among several of the tribes, though I did not witness it myself, wherein, like the manner of the peace offering, the firstlings and that of the male is offered, and no bone is to be broken. Such circumstances affords the strongest kind of proofs. All the tribes have a great feast at the dawn of spring, and at those feasts their various sacrifices are made. At the approach of the season of green corn, a feast of the first ears are sacrificed with great solemnity, followed by a feasting and dancing. So at the ripening of different kinds of fruit, the first and best piece that is cut from a buffalo is always deodante. Over the medicine lodge, and also over the lodges of the most distinguished chiefs, are hung on high posts large quantities of fine cloth, white buffalo robes, or other most costly articles which can be procured there to decay and offering to the Great Spirit. The bunch of willow boughs with which each dancer is supplied in the mundane religious ceremonies, the sacrificing and other forms therein observed, certainly render it somewhat analogous to the Israelitish feast of the tabernacles. The universal practice of solis cum sola, of the women ablution and anointing with bear's grease, is strikingly similar to the Jewish custom. Every family has a small lodge expressly for this purpose, and when any of the family are ready for it, it is erected within a few rods, and meat is carried to her where she dwells, and cooks and eats by herself, an object of superstitious dread to every person in the village. The absence of every species of idolatry amongst the North American Indians affords also a striking proof of the ceremonial law, and stamps them at once in one respect, at all events, different from all other savage tribes of which we have any knowledge.